entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It is a tough, tough, tough job to be in. You're the person who gets paid the last, but you're the person who gets in the door first. And so I understand where people come from. And if it's not for you, then it's not for you. But what I say is that you're going to be a great contributor no matter what you do. So I have this one instance where someone once said, Ashwin, you talk about humor a lot. Tell us a joke. And I said, well, I'm not a comedian and I'm not a clown. So I'm not going to perform for you. But at the same token, I do also believe that if we are going to get something meaningful out of it, we need to be a little lighthearted and not so scripted.
Welcome to the Ecom X Factor podcast, where it's all about launching and scaling your business using sales funnels, automations, and smart marketing. And now, please welcome your host, the founder of Ecom X Factor, Yaron Bin.
Hi, Ashwin. How are you?
Good, yourself?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited. First of all, I flattered you already for the background. And I normally, it is something that I have in my toolbox for ice breaking. I flatter people about the background, but your background really stands out.
I appreciate that, thank you.
And I wanted to, before we dive into this conversation, because I'm sure that we have a lot to cover, you have such a wide, broad resume and experience. Can you tell a bit about your background story for the listeners who don't know you, or mainly people who might not know you yet?
Yeah, sure. I don't know how far back I want to go, and not to mention I don't want to age myself, so I'll try not to go too far out. But no, my education started out in computer science and business, and the plan was always to get into the tech industry at some point. And then I did have a career path in tech, and I think one of the things that got my attention was I was curious. I wanted to explore things that was just beyond my sort of certification or my skill sets. And so I always sort of say this, and it always makes me sound like a kid, but I remember there's this scene when I was a kid. I used to watch this cartoon, The Jungle Book, and there's this scene where the bear picks up the rock to show Mowgli what's below the rock. And it's so I've been sort of that image has stuck in my head, which is I'm curious about what's below the rock. So I want to keep looking at what else is there. And so I ended up doing my MBA from Purdue. Post that, came to Europe at ASAP in France and got my master's in management from there, Hungary as well. And one of the things that I wanted to do was to see how I could leverage what I've learned over the years from both my education as well as my experience and see whether or not that could be applicable to other industries. So I ended up going into police services in the justice system. I ended up working in healthcare. And I think one of the things that I always did to sort of keep myself entertained, because I always like to do new things, was to get into consulting. And so while doing consulting, I was fortunate enough to be able to advise various governments and heads of state around various matters, from education to healthcare to tech to information management, communications, marketing, that sort of thing. And one thing led to another. And I think there was this line, there was this quote that still is stuck in my head from when I used to work in the public government or the public service. And someone once told me, Ashwin, you're going too fast. And government is designed to be like a cargo liner. So you make small shifts, you don't make drastic changes. And I think that line sort of gave me the fuel to basically say, love working here, love all the people that I'm working with, but this isn't for me. And I need to do something where I have the freedom to move this cargo liner as fast as I want to and as quickly as I want to, and make those sharp turns as much as I want to. And so I ended up sort of venturing out. And that was the genesis of WeUsThem. I was fortunate enough to have a business partner in Fathin, who is my co-principal at WeUsThem, and she's very well celebrated as an executive herself. And she brought the creative side of the house. I brought the technical and the business side of the house. And so we were sort of a match made in heaven, if you want to call it that, business heaven anyways. And so we came together, we put together WeUsThem. It started out as sort of a consulting and ad firm, and with small sort of humble roots. Today we are serving clients in 6 continents. We have just this year launched our own separate entity as well. We've launched a startup that we're going to be announcing formally in the new year in healthcare, where we have put together an IP that we have been named Canada's one of the top 10 innovative businesses in Canada by the Canadian Business Magazine. And we've won numerous awards and sort of numerous recognition, numerous accolades. So so this is sort of what the story is up to now. Who knows what the chapters are going to be going forward, but I think I'm excited and looking forward to what it's going to be. But I will tell you this, I think one of the things that I will sort of hold true is what I said initially, which was I'm curious and I want to see what else is out there. And so, working with clients and across multiple industries in all 3 sectors has been sort of very rewarding. And working in different geographies with different cultures, different people, it's been absolutely phenomenal. So I mentioned that we work with clients in 6 continents, but we've also worked with their customers in 142 countries. And that statement alone is sort of very rewarding and sort of very humbling for us. And so, yeah, very proud of the work that our teams here and elsewhere have done, and looking forward to what's next. So 2023, here we come.
Awesome, that's amazing. I already have so many questions, but before, I want to ask you regarding what this guy mentioned, that he told you, Ashwin, you're moving too fast. So I want to dive deeper into the concept of velocity and speed. Were you moving fast? Was this part of your agenda or a principle that you believe in, or they were just moving slow? Or how do you view velocity? Is it very important in your opinion, or can you elaborate about this whole concept?
Yeah, I think speed is a question. I don't want to become the next Einstein, because I don't have the kind of brain power and brain cells. But at the same token, when I think of speed and when I think of velocity, as far as sort of changes, one of the things that has bothered me in recent years has been this whole notion of what is innovation, right? And when we talk about the innovation culture and we talk about the definition of innovation, everybody sort of uses that term so loosely these days, is that when we make small changes, which is an efficiency or an improvement, we call it innovation. Well, it's not innovative to, like Henry Ford said this, like, I want to be innovative, and therefore he came up with the automobile. He didn't just get horses. He didn't just add 2 more horses and say, now that's innovative. That wasn't innovative. So he changed the entire around motion. And so for me, speed was one of those things where I was looking to make changes where we could actually gain sort of true innovation and creation and creativity in a space where things have been done a certain way for decades before me. And so when you think of the public sector, nowadays there are a lot of sort of innovative beacons of hope all across various governments, not just in Canada, but across the world as well. But I think one of the things that got stuck in my head was I was trying to make change too drastically that people were uncomfortable with. And people talk about this notion of whether people are fit within an organization. I don't like that word fit. We are not squares and we are not circles, and we don't fit in those squares and circular holes. But I think one of the things that sort of stuck with me was I'm trying to make change for the public sector that's going to impact our citizenship. And to me, when somebody says you're going too fast, is first off, it's sort of, it's not motivational, so it's demotivating. But even more than that, I think one of the things that sort of stuck with me was it's sort of disingenuous, because we are here to serve the public and we're here to serve the citizenship. And if we can do it better and if we can do it faster, why wouldn't we? And my definition of fast is perhaps not aligned with the definition of fast for that individual that I spoke to. But it was one of the things where I said, this is sort of, I reached sort of my peak of how much I can do here. And the thing is, I love everybody I worked with. I love everywhere I worked, and won numerous awards for innovation and all that stuff there too. But I think one of the things that I've had the liberty of working on my own and putting my own business together was, now when I work with government and I sort of recommend sort of innovative change that's much faster and sort of much more drastic than they would have hoped, they're very much for it. So they'd rather work with me from the outside than when I was on the inside. And I'm okay with that. I mean, for me, it's about the change and the impact that you make. So if I get to do it within this environment versus another, fantastic. And I think that's what we have told even all our verticals and all our departments with our management team, which is we want people who are creative, we want people who are innovative, and we want people who will push the agenda and push the needle. So I think it's one of those things where it's not a question of going fast. It's a question of what the flexibility and latitude you have to be able to take that further. And I think I wanted more and I wasn't getting it. So I was sort of hitting this brick wall, and I said, okay, so this space is not for myself. So let me find another place, which is, and I created my own space for that.
Amazing. Yeah, I can definitely understand and relate to the fact that if you feel that there are too many constraints and limitations on your own potential or the way you want to conduct things, so it's maybe a better idea to seek an alternative, which in your case was to build a new business based on the principles that you believe in. I'm curious about this. If you have any frameworks that you use in order to maybe brainstorm ideas that will move the needle rapidly. I'm not sure that rapidly is necessarily the right definition, because what I'm hearing from you is not that the incremental speed is what you consider as velocity, but more innovation. So seeking different paths. So do you have any frameworks that you find very valuable that you use in your organizations or stuff like that is very allows meaningful change?
Yeah, no, and I think I'll take your second point first. Maybe I think around the whole notion of change for so for me, I think one of the things that I look at is I think change is good. Change is sort of our norm, right? And so the difference between efficiency-based change and the difference between innovative-based change are two different things. And we need both. So we need efficiencies in what we do and how we do it because we've been practicing it and that's required. And then we also need innovation. So we need to be feeding both of those aspects. With regards to frameworks, I have a lot of dear friends who talk to me about sort of different frameworks that they're either certified in or they use or they believe is good for them. I think one of the things that I've said is that, you know, I've been trained formally in sort of different project management methodologies, engagement methodologies, change and innovation culture methodologies and whatnot. I think one of the things that I've said is that I think it needs to be simplified. It just needs to be simple, which is, for me, it's a barrier-free mindset, which is if we didn't have any barriers, if we didn't put any barriers in front of us, what is sort of the art of the possible? What could we do? And I think starting the question there, I think is more important than going from a standpoint of this is what the problem statement is. So forget about fixing the problem. Let's think about, well, what's beyond that? What could we do beyond that? Because I think when we focus in on the problem itself, we end up sort of solving the problem, but nothing beyond the problem. So our sort of mindset is constrained to that sort of thing. And so design thinking comes into play here, where I like it from a standpoint of getting people around a boardroom table or a meeting room or a sort of a conversational space and whatnot, and having them consider what the art of that possible could be. And that art of the possible would take them well beyond sort of what their current mindset is telling them it is. And some of the things that come out of those conversations may not necessarily be achievable today, but it is sort of things that we aim for and we sort of are looking forward to getting to at some point. And so whatever we do today will lead us there. And so I think that's sort of in my mind, that's sort of the path that we should be taking.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. This is very interesting. But do you have like a structured SOP for this, or because it's a very creative process, so you don't have to you don't like putting limitations or constraints on it, or you just come sit with a few people, experts in the specific field, and people, workers from your company that you appreciate their opinion, and you just start brainstorming regarding the impact that you want to create, and from there reverse engineer?
I think it's a combination. So one of the things that we like to do is with our creative teams, for example, and when I say creative, I don't just mean sort of our people in the arts and people in the design fields, but also our creative people in our strategy folks as well, even our technical people. When they come and sort of do brainstorming, they start with a blank slate, and our tables and our walls are all glass. So it is all meant to be blank slates. You sort of work off of those. But I think one of the things that we also sort of like to frame it around is we still need some level of an idea of where we need to be. So we can be in space and in all over the place, or we sort of confine ourselves to Earth or Mars or whatever. We need to have some level of an indication of where we need to be and sort of what sort of our sandbox and playground should look like. With clients, we tend to be a little different. So when we work with our clients and when we engage with them, so we've got a 3-tiered process for engagement that we do with them that includes both primary and secondary research. With them, it's a very much trademark process where we say one of the things that we have is it's very structured and primed to take us down a path that we want them to go down. It's very much open thinking, and so we still don't want barriers to be there. But at the same token, when you bring in a group of people that you don't know, and we have run engagement sessions with thousands and tens of thousands of people at any given time in large rooms, and when we've done that, you have to be very mindful of the fact that some people will volunteer information, some people won't. Other people like engaging in this fashion. Other people are introverts. They don't like doing this as well. And some people have big, bright ideas, and others are focused in on sort of the here and now. And so when you have such a diversity in your audience, you got to be mindful of the fact that there may or may not be open sharers and open sort of collaborators. There may be some who would want to be in smaller groups, and they want to be able to take advantage of the fact that they can share their ideas in a safe space or in a place where they are comfortable. And so what we do is we also have prompters. And so we have prompting questions and prompting thoughts and prompting ideas. So this way individuals aren't left to their own thought processes and sort of their own devices around what needs to be thought about, they are also given some sort of pathways that they can pick from. And also, they're not meant to be limiters, but they're meant to be sort of conversation starters. And I think that's where I think in those situations, that's very helpful. I do know that there has been situations where people like myself, when I get into a room and let's say I'm running the engagement session, I can have a conversation with somebody and we'll be talking about a specific topic, and then we end up going well beyond that topic into so many other things. I was in a conversation with a client's CEO at one point in time. We were having a great conversation about the future and his hopes and dreams for what he wanted in the future and whatnot. And then suddenly he saw the artwork behind me. So I was literally in this position the last time I was having this conversation. And the funny thing is we have beautiful walls, but I ended up picking this as my background. Anyways, so he started looking at the artwork and he started talking to me about art. And so he said, Ashwin, have you seen these pieces in reality? And I said, yes, I have. I have seen some of them. And so we had a phenomenal conversation about galleries globally that had some beautiful artwork. And I was talking to him about the Van Gogh, for example, that's up. And I told him about when I was in the Netherlands and I went to the Van Gogh Museum. It was just gorgeous to actually see that up front in person in reality. And he started talking about his sort of travels to Prague in the Netherlands and the UK and Paris and whatnot, and where he went and saw these in person as well. And I think that conversation led us to creativity, it led us to innovation, sort of a different mindset and a different cultural sort of structure, I suppose. But I think one of the things that came out of it was understanding the individual and where his thought processes came from. So he was influenced by what was happening beyond sort of his local environment. And he was very much influenced by what's happening across North America, what's happening in Europe and Asia and the Middle East. And so he was taking all of those sort of learnings and he was bringing it to the conversation. And I think those sorts of conversations are so meaningful because once you sort of get the idea of where people come from and sort of where their thoughts are from, it sort of helps you structure around where they want to get to. And I think that's really helpful. So yeah, so I think I may have given you a longer answer than you were looking for, but I think it was one of those things, it's one of those things where we use a combination of an approach, knowing who our audience is and then understanding what they would be most comfortable with. Even in our team, some of our departments, for example, bring on new people and they tend to be shy going in. And when they first join us, give them a little bit, give them a few weeks, give them a couple of months. And once they realize that we are looking for their creativity, we want them to voice their opinions and whatnot. And they can't keep quiet. They're like me, they just keep going on and on. So it tends to be a great conversation.
Awesome. Yeah, I can tell by the way that you speak and explain about this, that you put a lot of thought into these topics and the topic of how what motivates human being and incentivizes them and how different humans react to different prompts. So this is very interesting and eye-opening. I was curious if you can share an example of one of these prompts that you might have added lately to your process, or that you think that if you could have eliminate all the other prompts, this prompt is the only prompt that you would keep. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
Yeah, well, let me just back up by just taking what you just said. So it's in our name. So it's we, us, them, right? The reason we came up with the name was because it was we equals us plus them. It was this whole formula that me and Fatima were thinking about, which is how do you sort of shorten that distance between people and where they come from and their ideas? And the reason we were thinking about that, of course, is because we've got our clients and they've got their clients or their customers. And so how do you bring them closer? Because the closer you bring an individual to a brand, the more they're willing to sort of engage with that brand meaningfully, whether it is for a for-profit motivation or a non-profit motivation, really doesn't matter. So how do you get that? In terms of prompts, one of the things that I've always told our strategy people who usually conduct our engagement sessions is, you've got to read the room and you have to know who's around the table and sort of where they're coming from. We have some really tough players and we have some really well-celebrated executives and leaders who are very much of the mindset where they are looking to go down a singular path, and that's what they're there for. And I think what we have sort of found is that selective sort of choices around humor certainly help individuals as well. So I have this one instance where someone once said, Ashwin, you talk about humor a lot. Tell us a joke. And I said, well, I'm not a comedian and I'm not a clown, so I'm not going to perform for you. But at the same token, I do also believe that if we are going to get something meaningful out of it, we need to be a little lighthearted and not so scripted. I think one of the problems that happens is that we end up getting these long scripts that are approved by our clients around questions and promptings and what have you. But there's always this entire preliminary document that we also send to them to say, when we engage with people, we want them to be authentic. We want them to be really themselves. And so these questions are prompters. And trust me when I tell you, if there's 10 or 15 questions in that document, we end up going through about 5, and the rest of it's literally organic, what comes out of those 5 questions. And it takes us down a path that we never thought possible. And the funny thing is that when our clients look at our recommendations and sort of our findings after the fact, they're shocked by the idea that people have such motivational and sort of foresight into what they want from the future that they would never have thought would ever have happened, or they would never sort of receive from those people. And so I think one of the things that helps us is sort of we don't believe in sort of the scriptured, structured things. So for example, I've been in sessions where you need to have an icebreaker. So they will get you to get up and do some stretches or whatever. Then there's some others will want to have a few sort of exercises. If you were a rock, what kind of rock would you be? Or pick a rock and explain it. All that's great. And all that may create some sort of humor, sort of hilarity, and sort of bring some lightness to the conversation. What it doesn't do is it doesn't connect with the individual. And you've got to connect with the people. And once you do, the things that they share. I mean, I was just in Toronto, for example, just a few weeks ago, or sort of like last month, I believe. And I went to meet my clients, some of my clients that were there in central Canada. The funny thing is, I ended up meeting with them during one of the worst snowstorms ever. It was the first snowstorm in Toronto, and I got delayed because everything was just stopped. And anyways, I reached their offices, and this was in multiple sort of offices that I went to for different clients. Every single one of them, we were having conversations, and I said, happy to talk about our work and whatnot, but I'm just here to talk to you guys. We ended up spending 3 hours, and I was delayed for my next meeting, and then I went to the next one. I was delayed for another 2.5 hours, and every single one of them got into this conversation about everything but work. They just wanted to talk about, they wanted to connect. And that connection is so important, especially when we are in a post-COVID era, in a work-from-home culture. You want to be able to get that social connection. And once we had that sort of connect, we joked around, we laughed. I was sitting there, and one of them actually got me a mint tea, and she remembered that when we were talking, I was joking around in one of our conversations virtually, and I said I've swore off coffee, and I'm now getting my zen back and having my mint teas and my jasmine and green teas and all that. And so she got that for me, and it was so lovely to actually have somebody remember that. But that social connection is what's important. I think that sort of comes from the standpoint where you sort of disarm people and you give them a reason for just relaxing, just being themselves. And I think that's fantastic. And it doesn't matter what the topic is. We have worked in economic development, in hospitality, in transportation, in infrastructure, in energy. We've done so much work in so many different industries, but people are uniquely themselves. They're just people. And so once you take the industry out of it, once you take the sector out of it, once you take the geography out of it, the language out of it, they're just people. They just want to have a great conversation and sort of connect with individuals as well. And it doesn't matter if you're an introvert, doesn't matter if you're an extrovert. You give people the opportunity to sort of connect. It becomes such an authentic conversation, and you actually sort of get into it to have that authentic conversation. Now, some people are always going to have their guard up, and that's okay. But I think if you want to have something meaningful come out of it, you need to be able to have those sort of authentic connections.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate you sharing this. First of all, I want to say that the definition lighthearted, I mean, I'm not a native English speaker, but I knew the word, obviously. But when you mentioned this, I felt so at ease, and it's such a beautiful word, lighthearted. I don't know, it's something in between, like you said, humor, but humoristic, but on the other hand, not being a clown, being just lighthearted. I don't know, it's beautiful in my opinion. And another comment that I have, not really a comment, but I wanted to ask you that I took a look in your website and I did research before we hopped on the call, and I saw that you guys were serving so many different clients from so many different verticals. So one of the questions that I prepared is, how come you're able to serve so many different clients in so many different verticals? And you kind of answered it before I even asked the question, because you said at the end of the day, people are people. Everyone is unique, and most often than not, we discuss non-work related topics, and afterwards we go into the work. Is this a correct observation?
It is, but I think it's half of the coin, right? So if you flip the other side of the coin, people always say, do you have industry expertise? So for example, do you the oil and gas industry, or do the energy industry, or do you the hospitality industry, or travel, tourism, whatever it is, they always ask us. And I think one of the things that we go into and we say is, what it is, the fact that we actually don't know those industries, if we don't have a portfolio. So if we don't know those industries, that makes us actually unique. Because we come at it from a child's perspective. We come at it from the perspective that we actually want to explore more. Whereas other people take things for granted, and other people come in with their own baggage and their own information from previous experiences, we come in with it fresh. So we've been caught before where people say that, okay, so Ashwin, you said that to us last time. Now why should we give you more work? Because now that you've experienced, that no longer holds true. So then we joke around and we say, well, where can you get this sort of relationship? This relationship that we have built and we have fostered, you're not going to get that with anybody else. We're family. And so you're part of an extended family. And it speaks to sort of our retention rate. I mean, we have something like the lines of, I think last I checked, and they were telling me about this. We have a client retention rate of about 83 or 84%, which is sort of fantastic to hear. And people keep coming back for more work, and that's great. And I think it's a testament to our people, which is they also sort of have this mindset of relationship and sort of building that relationship. So we may go in at it like a child with sort of bright-eyed, going into it, wanting to explore the art of the possible and sort of what are some of those things that we don't know, and sort of not take things for granted right away. But I think when we get into it, when we understand it, we also don't take it for granted, because we're also very much of the opinion that these are things that excited us when we first saw them. So it's going to excite somebody else who's not seen it as well and who's not experienced it as well. And so I think that that sort of notion of not being limited by it, I think that's what drives us even further.
Nice. I really like the objection handling, because very often startups or businesses, they encounter this issue that it's like the chicken and the egg. You don't have experience until you have experience. You don't know a domain until you've been working in the domain, but nobody gives you the chance of working in domain because you didn't work in the domain. So this objection handling, in a way, that telling that, yeah, I'm not in the domain, and this is the opportunity, actually, like flipping the disadvantage into an advantage. I really like it. Before we went on live, so I asked you about regarding anything initiatives or case studies that you've done lately. And you mentioned an initiative that, if I recall correctly, you started doing during the COVID, or it accelerated during the COVID, in which you advised to more than 360 organizations. Am I correct so far with the details?
It is, yes, yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I'd be curious if you can elaborate about this initiative and lesson learned and common mistakes that you saw.
Yeah, no, this was in 2018, I think, is when we first kicked it off. It's called Ad Free 30, which basically means you get 30 minutes of time with our team members, all of our team members, with no ads. So we're not selling you anything. There are no strings attached. We are here to provide you with free advice. And so we started in 2018 because, as a small business owner, when we first started out, I know what we went through, and it was not easy, right? And then we have been advisors and mentors to startups as well, so I know what they go through as well. And with our own whole new entity that we're also going to be announcing in the new year, Healthy Me, we know what the struggles are with that too. So in 2018, both me and my business partner thought that this is the time where we need to start off and sort of give back to the community. And both of us, we are on different boards and we volunteer with different organizations and that sort of thing anyways. But this was meant to be sort of what our company would invest in, what our company as a whole with our people would do. And so it's 30 minutes of consultative advice across all our different departments, whether it's technical, creative, strategic, administrative, you name it, we do it. We'd also partner up with a financial institution like a bank. We'd also partner up with lawyers, so a law firm, and these would be the larger ones in the area. And they would also provide for a sort of a one-stop shop. So you come in, you stop at every sort of station that you've pre-booked an appointment with, get your 30 minutes of free advice from each one of us, because you already stated what your problems are, and get that. And I think it was fantastic in its first year. It was absolutely brilliant. What happened in COVID was, both me and my business partner said, I think we need to do this sooner. We can't wait, because we used to always do it in November or December of every year, because it was our leanest period of the year. So we said, we'll take that time pre-Christmas and sort of make it our Christmas gift to the world. And so we would provide it as sort of free 30 minutes of advice. So during COVID, we said, we can't wait. March, everything shut down in 2020, and things were getting bad to worse. There was no foresight. There was no light at that end of that tunnel. Our entire business was being run, because we had been doing a lot of work virtually anyways, because about half of our business is international, about another 30% is across the country. So we don't do a lot of work in our region anyways. We were equipped to work from our offices remotely, or even from home remotely when we had to go home. So everybody had the equipment and everything. So we were well set up. That was not the case with most of the other businesses. And that wasn't the case with our tourism and hospitality, of course, because no one can come to your businesses, and you can't make any money when nobody comes to the doors. So we said, we have to do this. We have to go ahead and do this sooner than later. because there is a lot of hurt out there and people don't know what they don't know. And they're really hurting. And I have to tell you, we put a call out, one of the largest rates that we have received. And we have seen businesses from every country you can think of, and then some, and we have seen people represent nonprofits, for-profits, even the public sector. And we had about 300, I think it was around 373, 374, something like that. It ended up becoming somewhere around those lines. And we met with these organizations, and everybody had to do one task. They had to put in a question, what were their issues, who they were, and where they were at. And so that's it, 3 questions, send it across to us. And we would actually prepare before we got into this session, because what we didn't want to do was spend the 30 minutes getting that sort of gravestone information. We wanted that before. So we got all the information, we prepared ourselves getting into these calls. Because both myself, my business partner, and our departments got into it as well from their own perspectives. I tell you, it was encouraging to be able to provide such advice to all these businesses and all these organizations, but it was hurtful. It was so sad to see that there were so many people hurting from a standpoint of, you would hear things like, Ashwin, I don't know if there's anything I can do. I don't know. I mean, you can give me as much advice as you want to, but there isn't much. I mean, we already have debt, because we had already been debt ridden while running our business day to day, that we were servicing this debt. Now we're at a point where we don't only have to service this debt, but we also have no business coming through the door. I've got to tell you, it was humbling, saddening. I don't know, I'm going to tear up in a second. It was tough to sort of hear those conversations, and it was tough to be in those conversations, because as a business owner, you sort of relate in terms of, I joke around. You look at me today, and and people who know me when we first started the business, I always joke around and I said, I'm like the President Obama example, which is, if you saw him before he became president, if you saw him after he left office, and you put those 2 pictures next to each other, it's like completely night and day. It was a young person, and then here was a seasoned, sort of full gray fellow who left the office. And that's me, which is, I started out with a full head of hair and fully black, and there was no gray, and today I'm completely the opposite. And so I know what we have been through. And the funny thing is that everybody goes through the tough times when they start their business, and everybody goes through the tough times when the economy takes a bit of a hit. And then when you have COVID hit, your economy doesn't take a hit, it stops. The economy took full pause, and it was a full halt. So how do you do business then? And then people started coming up with ideas like, you can have things on e-commerce and you can ship things across to people. Well, you can't do that necessarily with food in some other businesses where you have perishables, and that doesn't work. Well, you can sell gift cards at a discount and get people to buy it at a discount. And they tell you, and what they don't realize is that, yeah, but they're already hurting. So you're telling me that they had to sell a $50 gift card for $30, they're going to lose more money. It doesn't matter. Like, it's a lose-lose situation. So how do you help them? So I think 370 plus businesses that we met with, it was very rewarding to be able to help them. Some of those businesses and some of those organizations we are still in touch with, they still come back to us and say, would you be able to talk to us again? Absolutely love to. And so we have seen some great sort of coming out stories from COVID and getting past it. I won't lie, there were a couple that didn't survive COVID. They couldn't, it was just too much for them. And 2 years of being shut down was not in the books for them. And they took all our advice. They tried to do what they could. There were some glimmers of hope that things would get better, but I don't think things got back to normal as quickly as they would have hoped. And they didn't do well, unfortunately. But even with them, I'm in conversations with some of them now where I'm sort of helping them and mentoring them personally to what that next sort of step looks like for them in their career path. And I think one of the things that I can say is that when I talk to them now, they have a smile on their face, and I look at them and I said, well, that's a little different. You're no longer in business, and I see you smiling. And they said, well, it was draining us, and it was such a burden. And when you're a business owner, one of the things that you think about is not just yourself, but you also think about the fact that there's a trickle-down effect where you're not only worried about your paycheck, but you're also worried about the paycheck of everybody else that works with you. And they have families and they have homes and they have to take care of all of those things as well. And so to see some of those people be able to say, all my people got well settled, they got into jobs and they found jobs and whatnot. And I'm sort of rethinking my career now. And some of them got into a new career path and some of them are still rethinking that. But they're at a point where they're okay, as in it wasn't worst case scenario. It was a bad scenario, of course, but nobody wants to lose their business. But it was tough. And so that sort of event for us at 330 has been sort of our community give back as an entire company year on year that we do for anybody that wants it. They don't have to be our clients. They don't have to know us. We put it out there. My alma mater, Purdue, actually put it out to all the alumni graduates as well. So during COVID, we had people come from there and they wanted to talk to us as well. And then we have different associations and groups that also want to open this up to them as well. And we said, go ahead. If we can squeeze you guys in, we'll squeeze it in and we'll go right to the end of as far as we can go. And it's been a very rewarding experience.
Sounds amazing. I really appreciate this contribution, and I can definitely relate. I can understand what you mean by trying to help people, and people come to you in their baddest moments. So it's probably not easy, but it's very rewarding when you're able to assist and help.
Right.
Are there any commonalities that you can say that you saw within the people that were able to overcome the market situation? Let's say, okay, most of the people that let off a lot of people and focused on email marketing succeeded. I'm just giving an example. Was there any commonalities that come to mind?
Yeah, I think some of them who rethought sort of their traditional structures. So some of them who took on sort of online commerce, e-commerce, so that situation, if they started thinking about, even if they had perishables, how could they sort of get onto the online space? We are a borderless economy, and so we can go to the world and we can access the world. And we've got platforms like Shopify, for example, that supports sort of international trade and sort of international sort of distribution mechanisms. And so you don't have to actually think about any of that yourself. And again, I'm not getting paid by Shopify, so this is not a sponsored ad, but I'm just saying that there are platforms like that are set up so that you can certainly do that. I guess that was a commonality, which was people were willing to sort of rethink how they did traditional business. Some of them started thinking of sort of shipping models, online models, e-models. Uber Eats for restaurants became sort of big. They sort of made a killing because they could now get a lot of restaurants onboarded, whether it was them, Skip the Dishes, or all of those different apps that were out there. I think some of them rethought how service delivery needs to occur. And I think one thing that remains common with all of them was they learned from that experience. It was a very bad sort of way to learn things, but they learned that there are different ways to do business, and sort of creating different lines of revenue ensures sort of sustainability long term. It's not a case of if we'll ever have another pandemic, it's about when we'll have our next one. And so if that happens, we've got to be ready for it. And I think that was one thing. The other thing that was common that came out of our conversations was businesses need to have a rainy day fund, and we can have debt as part of doing business, but you need to have some sort of fallback. You need to have a sort of a rainy day fund that can help you get through a certain period of time. It doesn't have to be 2 years, because that was unheard of in our sort of history, but there has to be some sort of a mechanism of saying, we've got this war chest, if you want to call it that we can go to help us and support us going forward. And even if it's small, it doesn't have to be huge, but it helps you sort of sustain your business long term. And I think that came out of it as well. And people have started doing that. I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be sort of investing or spending our money, but I'm saying that there has to be a healthy portion of how you plan for the future, which is some part of it goes to service your debt, some part of it goes to growth, some part of it goes to expenses, some part of it goes to savings. And that sort of mentality, not just as a business, but as an individual, is helpful thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. And that rainy day fund can come very handy should something like this occur again. And in our lifetime, I can almost say that some of the experts out there, because I'm not, but we work in healthcare quite a bit. We've got some great friends in there. And we talked to some of these folks in infectious diseases and healthcare. They keep saying, Ashwin, it's going to happen. There will be sort of and it's not one of those things where we just keep crying wolf all the time, but it is going to happen. And if it's going to happen, we need to be prepared for it. And I think that's sort of our lesson that we take out of this, is that what do we do going forward? And any new business coming up now should be starting to thinking about not just about the day-to-day and the here and now, but how do I sort of look at it long term, and how do I sustain that long term? I think that's important. So that should be something to think about, but also rethinking about the fact that we aren't limited by our geography. We aren't limited by an industry. We aren't limited by our sector. The only limitations that we have are those that we put in front of us, right? And so if we start removing our own barriers, then I think the art of the possible, and I keep using that phrase, I'm not a big fan of the phrase, but the art of the possible becomes limitless. And I think that's one of those great things, that if you can do that, that'd be fantastic. There was this Canadian astronaut that I met with as a kid, and he was on the East Coast, and he came down, and my science teacher at the time was really impressed by the work that I was doing, and he said, "What, I've got an invitation, you should go." And I said, I'd love to. And I went down, and he was at the museum, and he was talking. And then I had this big poster that I got as I walked into the thing. And I wanted him to sign it. So I went up to him and I wanted him to sign it. And he signed it, and his words still resonate with me. And he said, space is not the limit. Sky is not the limit. And so that sort of quote where people keep telling you sky's the limit, or you were told that as a kid to look up the skies and see the heavens, and you can see that you can reach all of those places. And he says, I've been past that. It's not the limit. Right? It came from an authoritative source. It's not the limit. And hearing from him and hearing him talk about it was fantastic, and sort of getting inspired by that was fantastic. So I think that's the sort of thing that we should be thinking about, which is how do we do business differently, whether it's an online space, whether it's an offline space, whether it's a hybrid model as well, whether there are ways that we can do this easy. That's great. I mean, I think if you think about it, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, e-commerce was sort of the thing that was just coming up, and everybody was thinking it was so sexy that everybody needed to get into it. But it was so difficult to do. The amount of money you would have to invest in it, and the amount of effort that you would have to have behind it, from security to technology to marketing, it would be a whole bunch of costs that you would have to put into it. Today, anybody can stay at home and set up a business, and they're online in about the next 30 minutes. And so that whole shift, not just as a website, but also selling through social media and having those sort of hooks in as well. It's one of those things where you need to stop thinking about those barriers and start thinking about it from a standpoint of, why are my customers only those that I can touch and feel? Why can't I have customers that are well beyond that? And I think that sort of mindset of what else is possible is I think where we need to get to.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. What you mentioned regarding the mindset reminds me of one of the conversations that I like reviewing by Dan Kennedy. Dan Kennedy is a very famous marketer. And he said, he was asked what is the common trait of all the entrepreneurs that he saw succeed. And he has worked with many entrepreneurs. And he said that the most common trait was the fact that after being hit, they were able to move fast and forward very fast. So anything that happened, they took it as a positive thing. Maybe it took them 2 days to recover, or 1 week, but they recovered very fast and kept moving forward. And he said that at the end of the day, it's a mindset thing, which is something that you often mentioned during the conversation. And I want to ask you maybe a bit of a personal question regarding how does your daily routine look like, or do you have any habits in order to this mindset that sorry for using words that might sound like a bit of a woohoo, very spiritual if you're not spiritual, but how do you keep this positive mindset in more challenging times? Or do you have any routines that you follow religiously, quote unquote?
Yeah, I think just to your point about the entrepreneurship thing, in recent years, entrepreneurship has been made so sexy. Everybody wants to be an entrepreneur. Everybody wants to be a founder, and they want to build a business. I've actually been the contrarian in that. I've actually said that entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It requires everything. It requires, I mean, the first couple of years, you're sleeping, eating, breathing, and if you're going to do it, you have to have the commitment. To your point about sort of picking yourself up and getting back out there, it's absolutely spot on, which is I believe in entrepreneurs that are tenacious. They go after it tenaciously, and there is nothing, absolutely nothing that can stop them. And we're all human, so we are going to be deflated from time to time. We are always going to be hit at some point in time. But to be able to get up and pick yourself up and get back out there and hit it, I think is important. So have that deflation point, because I think it's important to actually have the deflation moment where you actually say, boy, that was horrible loss, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to take that loss in, and you have to be able to understand that. And then you got to think about, okay, how do I go for my next win? Because that can't be it. That you can't put all those eggs in that basket. And so how do you think about what's next? And what is that next zenith that you need to reach? I think that tenacious attitude is important. The other one is chutzpah, right? So you need to be able to be courageous enough to take those steps that most others have not taken. That's what makes you an entrepreneur. If you wanted to do what was status quo and what everybody else did, find a job and do that, and do what you've been told to do. There's nothing wrong with being in a job. But I think if you're going to be an entrepreneur, you have to have the courageousness to be able to take that next step and that different step. And I think that's what's important. To me, what I would say is that I've read these self-help books, and I've read these things about the Musks of the world and the Gates of the world, and they talk about sort of what their daily routines are, how they help themselves and whatnot. Some people say we only sleep 3 hours, we only sleep 4 hours. And some say that we get up at 4 in the morning and I'm reading my first book and I'm exercising, I'm in the gym, I'm going for a swim, or whatever be the case. That's great. That's great. It's great when you reach that point in time in your life that you can actually do that. But as an entrepreneur, you don't have the luxury, because once you get up, even if you've had a bad night and a bad day, once you get up in the morning, you're the first one through the door. You've got to turn the lights on, because if you don't turn the lights on, no one else is. So you've got to have that mindset that says, when you get into entrepreneurship, there are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days. And you have to be able to take those bad days with the good. So celebrate as much as you can. But at the same token, understand that we go through peaks and troughs. And so when we go through those peaks and troughs, you're going to hit that trough at some point, and it may be a hard fall, but take it again, get back out there and go back up to what that next peak will look like. And that's important. And I think those pieces are, understanding that is important. There is no sort of magical way to get back to that peak. Everybody's different. Some people go for a run, some people meditate, some people want to do some yoga and sort of get into some exercise, and they do some routines and whatnot. For me, it's very simple. For me, I'm always curious about, as I said, picking the next rock, and I want to see what's below that too. And I think as much as the falls bother me, the rises are so much more exciting. And so that sort of that high that you get, it's so euphoric. Once you go on that climb and you've reached that zenith, it's just fantastic. And that euphoria is what you chase. And so once you chase it, even if you have that fall, you just say that, well, I'm going for the next one, and I'm going for the next one. And it's one of those things where people confuse it with greed, which is you're never happy. Well, I'm very content with where I'm at. But at the same token, I also know that there is so much more that I could be doing, or I would want to do, because we are human beings. We learn every day, we grow every day. If we don't, we stop, we don't live anymore. And for me, it would be one of those things where it is, what's next? Because I'm so happy where I'm at with what I now know. I want to know more. I want to go explore more. So what I would only suggest is that find your own way of sort of dusting yourself off. Find your own way of being able to get back out there and do it again and do it differently. And also know it is not a bad thing to say this is not for you. Entrepreneurship is not for everybody. It is a tough job to be in. You're the person who gets paid the last, but you're the person who gets in the door first. And so I understand where people come from. And if it's not for you, then it's not for you. But what I say is that you're going to be a great contributor no matter what you do. And it is those contributions that is what people are looking for. The mental health of entrepreneurs during COVID took a huge hit. And this is not even to add the physical health issues that they were going through anyways. And so you need to be able to take care of yourself. And once you take care of yourself, the business takes care of itself on its own, because when you get in there, you can do your best. The last piece of advice that I would say that I think I can leave with as far as that's concerned is, when we started WeUsThem early on, we didn't know it was going to stick with us, but people have loved us using it over and over again, and people have actually used it for themselves as well. We coined a phrase, be humble, but not shy. And so humility is great, but shout your successes through the rooftops, because we want to celebrate you. We want to be there right next to you saying, go for it. We are there to celebrate what you're doing and how you're doing it, but do it with a sense of humility, because at some point, you may not be shouting from those rooftops. You may be down below crying your worst tears because you're going through a trough, but we'll be there next to you, supporting you just like we did when you were celebrating. And we expect the same. So we are all human. We want the same from each other. So yeah, I'd leave it at that.
Amazing. This is beautiful. Yeah, I saw it in your website, and I love that message. I want to be respectful of your time. I have so many other questions that maybe we can do, if you're willing to do, maybe we'll do a follow-up episode. But for now, sure. Do you have anything that you would like to discuss that we haven't discussed, or anything that you would like to mention, or some closing thoughts for a beautiful conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the only thing that I would put out there is seek out the support that you need. I think one of the things that people sort of worry about is, can I reach out to that person, or can I reach out to that company or whatever? And would I be able to get the support that I need? It could be anything. It could be informational support. It could be mentorship. It could be financial support, whatever it is. The worst answer that you can possibly get is no. And that's not a bad answer. That's just at least somebody recognized that you put in a question. So the only thing that I would say out there is that always seek out support and friendship and sort of that mentorship and guidance from those that you admire or you want to be like, or that you think will be able to offer you something, and then take it and then make it uniquely yours. Because don't replicate somebody else, because there's no point for that. Be yourself, but learn from what they have to offer. I've had so many people sort of approach me out of the blue, send me a message and say, Ashwin, love what you're doing. Heard of the success that you had. Would you be able to spare a few minutes to have a conversation? Great, let's do it. Let's have a cup of coffee and let's chat. I don't know what we're chatting about. I don't know what we're getting into, but let's do it. And as I said, I think the social connection is so important. And I think one of the things that I've enjoyed myself is that I've also reached out to other people that I've sort of admired and sort of would have loved to have a conversation with and whatnot. And again, as I said, the worst thing they could possibly tell me is, nope, don't have time. And that's okay. Nothing wrong with that. So then I know that I go to my next. And so the only thing that I would leave folks with is, whether you're in the online world, whether you're in the e-commerce world and you're doing business online, or whether you're doing business in a traditional model or a traditional channel, if you're bricks and mortar and not necessarily online, that's okay. It doesn't matter what you do, whether you're a nonprofit, whether you're in the public sector, in the private sector, as an individual, as a business owner, as a leader, know that there are people out there who are willing to not just listen to you, but also provide their guidance and their support and their mentorship. And you never know who you're going to have a conversation with tomorrow, and you never know what they'll bring to the table tomorrow. So be open to the possibility of great conversations and sort of great sort of learnings, and also what that next step could look like for you. And even if you don't learn anything, you've made a connection that you've never had before. And I think that's important. One last thing that I would also say is,
Go ahead.
Social media is there to help you facilitate those connections, but it's not there to replicate or replace those social connections. So you may be in Portugal right now, but I hope to see you sometime in person if I can. And if I happen to be in Spain, I'll probably hit you up and say, we're just a country apart. We can fly over and we can say hello in person. I think that sort of human connection is lost when we think of the working from home culture, and we think of social today, and we sort of talk to each other and we build these virtual connections and these virtual relationships. I think get past that and enjoy the possibility of what come from a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, whatever it is, because that human connection is so important. And I think if I can take it past the whole woo-woo social aspect of things, thinking of the for-profit people out there, you never know what those connections can bring you, and you never know where they can take you. So reach out and talk to those people. They can lead to some brilliant conversations. So yeah, do that. If you'd like to hit me up too, please do. I'm available on all social out there, but yeah, reach out. We can certainly have conversations virtually or in person as well. I'm always happy to do that. My calendar is quite ugly, but we'll certainly find some time in there, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ashwin. I didn't expect this conversation to go to this route, but I don't regret it. It was amazing and it was very inspiring. But I thought that initially we will talk about more strategical or tactical things, but I'm happy that it went this way. It was very inspiring, and I really appreciate the words of wisdom. And we will share the links to your LinkedIn and website in the show notes. And that's it, I guess. Thank you so much.
It's been fantastic. Thanks for the opportunity, and it was great talking to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hi guys, this is Yaron again. Just a few more things before you take off. Number one, if you want to learn more about e-commerce and marketing, make sure you check out our YouTube channel, which is called Ecom X Factor Official. Number two, check out our Facebook group, which is called Ecom X Factor Marketing and E-commerce Mastermind. This is a great place to ask questions and connect with other business owners. And last but not least, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to share it with your friends and colleagues, plus leave a review at your favorite podcast app.